I hereby introduce to you Mr. Michael Veazey.
So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show, the place to be for UK-based Amazon entrepreneurs. As you can see from the banner, we are here to give expert information for British Amazon sellers. That doesn't mean you have to be selling in Britain, you can be selling in the US. I've got a very expert person here today. In fact, the name of his business is suspensionexperts.com, and that man is Joshua Price. And a friend of mine heard him speaking very recently at an Amazon event and was very, very impressed with his clear-mindedness and the precision of his work. So it's a very important topic. It's something we try not to talk about and think about, but actually we should talk about the elephant in the room, about Amazon account suspension. So Joshua, you're the man for the job. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. So it's also nice to have another British person on. That I think the British Amazon scene of sellers and experts like yourself is growing and becoming very powerful. So it's great to have somebody who's part of that community. So Joshua, just give us a sort of 2-minute summary of your background. How do you come to be involved with Amazon sellers, and why the suspension experts business?
Sure. Well, I started my sort of career in e-commerce, primarily working with larger organizations and multiple platforms. So that included Amazon, of course, but sort of spanned a range of many online marketplaces, platforms internationally. And Amazon being the largest marketplace was somewhere that I decided was definitely the focus for both the business that I was involved in at the time and probably the future of e-commerce as it sat. And then eventually, suspension occurred. And, as obviously we'll talk about later, it's a pretty common situation. And almost by chance, I was just a guy that got assigned to fix the problem and work it out. And from there, I ended up in a world of suspensions and understanding, that it was something that people didn't know about and didn't know enough about. And within a couple of months, I just had queues of people who had heard that I'd managed to make it work, and they wanted to get their accounts back as well. And so now we're about 3 years later, and I've helped over 700 sellers.
Great. So thank you very much for the intro. I mean, it's obviously you've got a massive background and you've helped over 700 people. That's an amazing body of knowledge from which to draw on. But it's very interesting that you said that you just figured out how to deal with account suspension, and there were queues and queues of people. So what that implies to me is that there was, apart from being a smart move from your point of view, that there was a massive need which wasn't being properly addressed. So it's one of the reasons I wanted to get you on the show, because I think it's the elephant in the room that people don't talk about enough, and either bury their heads in the sand, pretend it doesn't exist, which is not good business practice, because not acknowledging a risk is not good investment or business strategy. And they say hope is not a strategy, as the Marines say. But then the other hand, running scared and just not doing anything because you're scared to death and you think you can't do anything about it, equally, you're never going to get anywhere in business. So the first thing I wanted to ask is then to make us a risk assessment around this. How big a possibility is account suspension in your experience? And can you put any statistics or quantify that in some way?
Sure. Well, firstly, there's no data. Amazon doesn't give us the numbers. And of course, I'm only going to speak to a lot of sellers who are suspended. That's what I deal with. But from my interactions and the people I talk with, it's a risk for everyone. There's no seller that's not at risk from it. It doesn't matter about the size, doesn't matter how new the account is, and doesn't matter if you, as far as you can tell, you're stuck to the rules. How many people get suspended? In my opinion, I estimate it to be over 10,000 sellers a day. So it's a huge number of sellers. And for most people, I'd say they're going to get suspended once every 2 years, assuming that their account is making sales between sort of 10 and 50,000 a month. The less sales you do, I'd suggest there was less risk, simply because you're not interacting with as many customers, and therefore sort of less areas of things to go wrong. However, as a smaller seller, you're often less aware and less experienced, and that does mean you can fall into a number of other pitfalls as well.
Yeah, well, thank you for assessing that sort of risk for us, because I think that ties in a bit with my own more anecdotal experience. Obviously, you have a very expert overview of a certain sort of narrow kind, but broad in some other ways. In a mastermind that I'm a member of, I've got friends who are doing some quite big numbers, and out of the mastermind of, I don't know what it is, 20 people or something, I would say there are 2 people that seem to experience suspension issues, and in both cases they're doing quite serious numbers, so up sort of the order of 100 or 200k a month in through their account as a whole. But I take your point that the smaller sellers don't really know always what they're doing, and therefore they're increasing their risk unnecessarily. So thank you for trying to sort of put a number on that. I think that's really helpful. It's a bigger risk perhaps than even I'd realized if there's 10,000 a day being suspended, as you suggest. So the next thing that happens is, okay, the probability of the account suspension looks a bit higher than perhaps I would have thought and most people might think. The second question is then how big a risk if it actually happens? First of all, how likely are we to get our account back? Is it just a little bump in the road? Is it the end of the road?
Mm-hmm. It really depends on lots of factors, of course. You're going to hear me say that time and time again throughout this interview. Essentially, a first offence is generally something that can be excused. Depending, obviously, on the reason, you could be offline for maybe 2 weeks, but I'd say nearly every seller can get back on their first suspension. And right. Amazon are lenient; they do want you on the platform, and therefore they are giving that opportunity as long as you correctly handle the appeal. It doesn't mean it's some guarantee that you get back on. You do have to do the right things, but they're open to it. If you begin to get second, third, and fourth for different reasons, so have an ODR issue to start with, and then you have an issue with late shipment, and then you have an inauthentic complaint, because they're separate issues. In the same way you might have the UK here, policing, you get stopped for speeding multiple times, you get points on your license, that kind of thing. Multiple driving offences would take away your license, but if you did some other offence, it doesn't sort of impact your driving. It's the same thing with Amazon.
Okay, I like the analogy of the driving license. Yeah, that's quite an interesting one, actually. So basically, and this is very interesting because I've never really heard anyone say this, even a couple of people who deal with the suspensions a lot that I've spoken to. So first offence, and if I understand, is basically you need to do the right thing, and obviously we'll talk to you in some detail about what that might be. You've got to handle it correctly, but you think first of all you're likely to get reinstated, and probably within a couple of weeks. Is that a fair summary? Yeah,
that's a very, very fair summary. I love it when people come to me and they tell me that they've been suspended for the first time, because I know we're going to have success.
Great. Okay. And you mentioned various things, some of which sound pretty technical, so we'll have to unpick those a bit later. ODR, inauthentic. We'll work out what that all means. But so I try and go from the big picture to small picture before we get buried in details with Amazon, because there's a lot of TLAs, right? 3-letter abbreviations which just knock around. So yeah, the other question I was going to ask, which you've answered partly, is how long does it take? Obviously, for a first offence, you're reckoning within 2 weeks. Let's say somebody managed to get an account suspended for the second time, in which case I think they're going to be all ears right now because they're going to be needing help. Then what are the probabilities of getting reinstated at that sort of point, and how long might that take?
Sure. It really depends on the reason, and that's where it becomes much more technical. And the reason that on the second suspension a lot of people need help is because their case is instantly complicated by their previous suspension. Without going too specific right now, there's 2 types of suspension sort of categories. There's performance and there's policy. So policy is all the rules, and if you break those, that's one sort of genre of suspension. And performance is all about your way of serving customers and running the account. Essentially, multiple suspensions in performance over a long period of time is much more understandable, because it's about your operations, and we all make mistakes, and customers complain about little things. The Royal Mail may be running late for some sort of shipment, for example. Amazon are more lenient, and therefore it takes less time to get your account back. So again, maybe a week to a month for a second suspension in the performance area. For policy, again, it's easy to break the rules, but Amazon are slightly tougher when it comes to allowing people to be reinstated from those. And therefore, while it can be very quick to get reinstated if handled correctly, most people, especially appealing on their own, due to their lack of experience and not knowing kind of what to put in an appeal letter, you could be looking at a couple of months if being reinstated at all.
Okay, great. Well, this is so useful. I think really everybody's got to really listen up on this stuff. So the difference between the performance offences and the policy offences, that's really good to know. Well, it's not good, but important to know the difference. And I guess that makes sense, because performance is one of those things, as you say, they take customer experience it's like a religion to Amazon, to Jeff Bezos personally. But nevertheless, they recognize that things can happen with, it's an imperfection of delivery rather than of intent. Whereas I guess the policy violation, if you're actually not taking Amazon's rules seriously and thus taking control away from Amazon. And again, Jeff Bezos, famously control freak. I mean, he's not just the CEO of Amazon and not just the founder of it, but he's very much liable to intervene. And that control freak kind of extends the whole way across the corporate culture. So it makes sense that they would take them more seriously. So thank you for the big picture stuff. And I just wanted to double check before we plunge into detail, because this can become obviously a very technical area, which is why you need an expert like yourself. Tell me about the US and UK thing. So first of all, do you work for people who've had accounts suspended on Amazon.com, i.e. in the USA? I noticed obviously you're British. We can tell from the accent and where you live.
Yeah. So Amazon, I don't know, most people are almost aware of how Amazon's set up as a structure. We have Amazon sort of North America, so that includes Canada, the States, and then Mexico. There's the Europe section, which is the UK, Germany, France, Italy, and Spain. And then there's also a sort of Asian arm of things, which should bring into sort of China, some of the Indian accounts, and Japan.
Okay, so the Asia wing covers all of Asia, not just kind of East Asia, but including India, Japan, and China, right?
Yes, and those are almost independent bodies. And so the team that you will speak to at Seller Performance, if you're dealing with suspension, is a different team in Europe to what it will be if you're in an American account. However, they all follow the same structure and the same rules, and therefore, not only does my sort of expertise and experience cover all of those, it also means I do help sellers in all of those countries, all of those accounts. But there is some slight differences, of course.
Okay. And presumably, from judging from that, you'd work with sellers based in the UK who sell, for example, in America, or you'd work with Americans who sell in America as well, or Americans selling in Europe across the borders. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's completely right. And actually, the more sellers I've worked with, I've been surprised myself at the range of geographies that people sort of live in and work from to then sell, internationally. Including a lot of sort of Eastern European business owners who are selling into the US. Yeah,
it's interesting. Well, I guess we both have similar sort of situation in that way, because obviously I get listeners from all sorts of the places, and I've worked with consulting clients, and I'm working with them one-to-one, mentoring them for their businesses. There's one guy I'm working with currently who's based in Poland. And I've worked with a couple of guys in Ireland, and then the rest are mostly in the UK. I haven't worked with it. Yeah. So you do discover, don't you, just how international business this is. It's fascinating what's going on. It's like a sort of global revolution that's flying under the radar, really. When it starts to be in the front page of the Telegraph, we know that this is, it's all too late. So
exactly.
Let's get into the first segment that I want to really delve into in detail. If suspension happens, so this is going to be for a small percentage of people in terms of what they need right now, but I think it's very, very important to have a contingency plan. It's just like you wouldn't get in a car without insurance, not because you think you're going to drive so badly that you're going to crash into every lamppost on the way, but just in case the worst happens, you're covered. So the first question is, if to sort of put a contingency plan for everybody, or if somebody's hurting right now, what's the first thing to do? Should you just do what a lot of people advise and just agree to everything that Amazon accuses you of and say, yes, I'm guilty, really sorry?
Mm-hmm. No, it's right. One of the worst pieces of advice, and I see it all the time. The first thing you should do the moment you see that notification, that email, is take 24 hours. Because our businesses mean a lot to us. They're very important. They pay for our holidays, they pay for our homes, they pay for our families, our children's educations, all these things from whatever size your business is, whether it's just a little bit of pocket money on the side or whether you're running a multi-million-pound operation. It matters, and we're emotionally involved. And the emotion is what ruins most people's appeals. And the people who send those instant appeals, as soon as they get that notification, they're like, oh my goodness, I need to be back online. And they don't do the research, they don't consider and understand the bigger picture. They appeal too quickly and it fails. And the first appeal is the most crucial appeal. It's the best opportunity to get reinstated. So if you mess that up, you're instantly making it harder for yourself. Right. And so my advice is don't do anything for 24 hours as far as contacting Amazon, but spend 24 hours working out your plan in detail, what went wrong, actually looking at the things that Amazon are saying, obviously doing further research, and if it's suitable for you, contacting an expert like myself to even give you just free advice.
Brilliant. So the first thing to say is it's amazing how when I talk to a huge range of people, which is a privilege and fascinating, but a lot of the same principles apply. And the first thing is just don't send any form of email in anger, right, or in upset. That's just great advice anyway. But yeah, don't poke the giant that is Amazon without knowing what you're doing. It's even better advice. So thank you very much for some common sense, but also it's just backed up by your experience, right? So it's not just a theory. But so the first appeal is very important. Also very important to know. Kind of makes sense, but again, I think with Amazon, everything is just so oversensitive. They tend to sort of shoot first and answer questions later. So the first thing to do then to respond to that then really is to do some research and make a plan. So what's the first thing to do is don't contact Amazon. The second thing to do is what then? What sort of thing do we actually need to research?
Sure. So Amazon invite us to appeal their decision, and they give you a little button in your account health, in performance notifications that you press. When you press that button, you get sort of 4 boxes. And in there is where you're going to put what we call the appeal and your plan of action. It's simply a letter. Okay. Now, what you need to research is the reason for your suspension. And you need to look at what actual solutions you can then provide to the reason. Okay. Now, you mentioned a moment ago about agreeing to everything. And while I don't think you should sort of lay down your life to Amazon's word, whatever they say, it's not, yes, oh, I definitely am 100% guilty. Don't want to jump after that. But in the same way, you don't want to start an argument either. You don't want to deny the facts. Amazon don't suspend people for the fun of it. They don't get anything out of it. There will be a reason, whether it's sort of genuinely your fault or the words they used are a good description of what's occurred. There will be a reason. Something has triggered it. So taking time is to basically decode Amazon's message and understand the reason for your suspension. So Amazon used the same terms for everything. So going back to ODR, which is order defect rate, and the target that Amazon give for that is 1%. So less than 1% of your orders must have received negative feedback or A to Z claims, which is a really tough target. It's the hardest of any marketplace to keep to. And so most sellers at some point will be caught by that. Now, Amazon are lenient on when they suspend you. It's not always actually at the 1%. But they'll send you a little email that says, sort of the beginning, we've removed your selling privileges because your order defect rate is over the 1% target. Now, the appeal letter back to that doesn't need to explain about the ODR. It needs to explain about the problems that caused your ODR to go over the 1%. Okay, now it went over the 1% because of complaints, but Amazon knows that. They need to know why you receive complaints, and then the reason for the complaints, and the reason for the complaints, and the reason for the complaints, and the reason for the complaints. And you have to go quite deep into your business's operations to find the real reason. And then when you fix that, you explain that back to Amazon. And that's kind of the process, I'd say, for the first appeal and doing into it, obviously with a range of reasons. For suspensions, you've got to do the research.
Great. Okay. So, I mean, we're going to have to break it down by the reasons for suspension, I guess. But the first thing to say is we don't agree blindly to everything or say that we're really guilty of things that we don't feel that we are. But equally, we're not fighting the facts. We are two things you just said. I just want to reflect back so that people get this because it's so important. You've got to decode Amazon's message. We'll look at more of that in a sec. And then but once they've told us what the defect or the problem is, we got to reverse engineer how our business inadvertently probably created that issue, rather than just say, yes, I'm guilty of not doing it. I'm really, really sorry. We've got to say, okay, this is how I believe it happened. So that's what the purpose of our research is. Is that correct? Yeah,
that's exactly correct. And one of the principles I tend to use is sort of a 3-step way of approaching this. So Amazon will give you the headline problem, and they make it sound big and concerning, and like you've sort of done something quite major. What we then do in this sort of delving deep and sort of reverse engineering, as you said, is we try and make that problem small, but we still try and find a problem. So with order defect rate, for example, well, I'll use that because it's very applicable to a lot of people. Mm. They're saying you've broken a metric, but what you need to do is find the reason. So that might be simply because the postal system you were using, so in the UK, Royal Mail is used by most sellers, they might have been slow, or there might have been a bank holiday issue, or there might have been delays, especially with the Royal Mail. That's unfortunately quite a common occurrence. And that is a small problem compared to you have broken a metric. So breaking a metric sounds pretty harsh and pretty bad. But if really it was just you didn't pay for first class, you paid for second class, or the pickup was wrong, or whatever, that's a smaller problem. And bridging the gap between the thing that Amazon said and a smaller problem this is the worst explanation ever, but this is reducing the size of the problem, right? Amazon are giving you a big hitting issue, and you've got to find something small, and then you admit to the small thing, you don't admit to the big thing.
Okay, great. That's as a general strategy. Yeah, I mean, what it reminds me of, because I guess like a lot of people, I will have spent a lot of my life either making my living either as an employee or as a freelancer. In my case, mostly the latter. And it's like that slightly. I was about to say, can I swear on the podcast? It's my own podcast, and slightly wanky interview question. What's your biggest weakness? I mean, you're there to sell yourself in an interview, right? So if they ask you that, basically what they're really asking is, can you make a small weakness sound good? So you might say something like, we've taken so much trouble. We wanted to save our, I mean, with Amazon, it's a bit different, but it seems like the same kind of thing almost. It's like, give me a weakness, and you're going, well, there's this small thing, and we presumably then the next thing you're going to talk about is how you address it. But yeah, I like the thinking because it makes fundamental sense psychologically. It's not fighting, and it's not admitting a massive fault. It's that middle ground, right?
Yeah, if we play out that analogy a little bit, essentially in that interview question, the bad answer will be, oh, my biggest weakness is I'm really lazy. I don't turn up for work most of the time. I sometimes turn up at 11:30 and I go home at 3, and I'm going to be an awful employee. That's not what they want to hear in the interview. What you say is something like, oh, I'm sometimes too committed and work too hard, right? You make it sound amazing, and it's not really a weakness. And that's what we do. Amazon are accusing you of not turning up to work. And we sometimes say, I just work too hard, and sometimes, things don't quite work out. Or this is a small problem, but don't worry about it. And we're trying to bridge the gap. And that's what the appeal letter and the plan of action and the sort of causes that we're submitting to them, we're trying to do. We're trying to bridge the gap between what they've got in data and what we're saying actually happened and how we fixed it. Because it's pretty hard to fix being lazy, but it's easy to fix turning up 5 minutes late.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, that is the number one thing not to say. My biggest weakness is that I really hate management, and all I want is your money. And but I like what you just put, that you just use the word data, which I think is a very, very key word. Obviously, it's a key word online, but I think you're bridging the gap between data, because that's how Amazon perceives the world. It's basically a tech company, right? I mean, one of the reasons Jeff Bezos moved to Washington State when he started off, and he was a super, super sharp guy. I mean, he's incredibly sharp, and he was in investment in Wall Street. So it's very much metrics there, but he went to Washington because he thought he could pinch some of the great engineers off Microsoft and the other sort of tech startups out there as well. So basically they perceive the world through the lens of data, and we're trying to kind of connect that to real world things and say, look, I know that on paper with the numbers this looks like we're doing something dreadful, but actually all that happened is a postman mislaid a parcel, and then they found it and sent it on. And actually when you look at it in the light of real life, that's not so bad. I mean, is that an accurate summary, or am I making things up here?
No, you're completely right. They are a very data-driven company. And I've had sort of the ability to have a look at the back end of Amazon from a seller performance perspective. So what they actually see when they're handling a case, when they're looking at an account. And they often will call it account notes. If you're on the phone with seller support, for example, they'll say, oh, well, it says in your account notes this. It's all codes, it's all acronyms, it's all data, it's all numbers. There's no long, expressive, beautiful piece of writing that explains about how great a seller you are and how lovely you are. It's some codes. It's some, this has been sent, this thing, this thing, this thing. And so that's what someone's looking at. And then they are looking at your beautifully written letter. And unless you're considering the fact that they're trying to marry up the two of those pieces of information, it really doesn't work. So you're right, data's key, and we bridge the gap between their data and what we can sort of write and then say actually happened.
So another thing is what you just said, this is what the person's looking at. So let's define who looks at it. And presumably it would be different people at different stages of processes. So who would be the first person if Amazon sends you a notification on your seller dashboard, or presumably from an email, and says we've suspended your selling privileges, and then you go and do a bit of digging around. When you do respond, who is going to see that initially, and then what happens after that?
Sure. Well, let me throw another caveat out and say we don't really know. However, a lot of data tells me, and many other people in the industry agree with this, that most cases will be handled by someone in India, someone in the Philippines, and if for the European accounts, potentially some sort of Eastern European countries will have Amazon offices where they have seller performance departments. And that's crucial because it means you have to consider that for the person reading your case, and it is a person, it may not be, English may not be their first language. They may be in a very different culture to you. And they may not sympathize with you in the same way that your fellow sellers may do. So you do have to consider the audience when you're writing. You know, I find it quite funny when, you know, people often write their own appeals and they finish their appeal with a line along the lines of, I've paid you £200,000 in fees last year through my sales. You want me on your site. Can you imagine being paid like below minimum wage to read letters and make these decisions, and someone's pleading for you to allow them to continue to selling, and their reason is because they make so much money?
Yeah.
Right. I don't feel sorry for you when you tell me you're a multimillionaire. It doesn't make me go, oh, it must be really tough. That's not really the right message to be putting out. So considering the audience by not using very complicated language, being clear, being concise, and all these things, but also actually considering that they are people, and they have hard jobs to do. It's very stressful work, and they are very rushed in it. Data tells us potentially between 7 and 11 minutes they have to read an appeal and make a decision on the next steps for it. That is what you have to really consider. So writing essays, all these things, is a bad move.
It's a sobering thought what you just said. So basically, to summarize, you've got somebody on minimum wage in India or Philippines who speaks English probably as a second language, taking 7 minutes to decide the future of our Amazon business. Is that right?
That's completely right. And that's why it's so crucial to send them the right information at the right time and not get it wrong.
Okay, that's beginning to make sense of why Amazon
seems to act. This is the failing point for many people. That's the major mistake that people make, is they don't consider that audience, and what they write is not at all relevant.
Right. I cannot thank you enough for this insight, because I think I've had a vague sort of idea around this, but I think you just put it in a nutshell really for us all, that the breaking point between us as third-party sellers and Amazon is really some third-party, is not third-party at all, is some guy on minimum wage, or guy or gal in minimum wage, who really doesn't necessarily understand anything more about Amazon than the guy off the street, except what they've been taught, which may or may not be accurate. So let's move on from that to slightly scary thought to what do we actually need to do then? So obviously we are, we've got our notification. Perhaps at this point we're going to have to break down into the details of what the different causes are, and presumably you need to adjust those in slightly different ways. Would you say that's true? And we looked at the big picture.
Yeah, that's completely right. I think this is almost as far as I can go as giving information that's going to be helpful that you can actually apply without getting more specific.
Great. All right. Well, let's talk about that in the next episode. Hi, this is Michael Veazey from Amazing FBA. I've got a quick one for you. If you're super stoked and awesomely excited to sell on Amazon, that's great. But if you're American, I'm afraid you need to stop listening, because this one is for the Brits only. I'm not being biased, but this is because I'm talking about something which is based in London. So you're going to need to be in Britain or near Britain to take advantage of it. The basic problem we have as internet entrepreneurs is we are lonely and isolated, because we're tapping, sadly, at our tablets on our own. We're cooped up with our computers, and we're going insane with the internet. We need to connect to other people. It's only a human thing, right? And relationships are the basis of all good business. So if you are in that situation, keep listening, because we have a solution called the Amazing FBA London Mastermind. But I'm going to specifically talk to you if you're in that situation, but you are yet to launch on Amazon. So you want to launch on Amazon, you haven't got there yet. This is exactly for you. It's called the Zero to Hero Pre-Launch Mastermind. And our aim is very simple: to get you from research or importing, or even if you've got products on the way to Amazon, to launch with your first product live on Amazon. That's our goal. That's our focus. How do we achieve that? Very simple. We have a face-to-face meeting of up to 15 people, no more than that. So it's very, very focused, and you get 30 minutes minimum to talk about your business and focus on the single issue that's blocking you that month to move you forward. The other way we keep you accountable is that we have a video accountability call once a month as well, which it goes in between the physical meetups so that we keep that momentum going, because momentum's everything, guys. As you know, on your own, you just lose the dream and you fall into slowness, and then the business just dies from neglect. So we do the opposite. We keep it moving, we keep each other motivated, we inspire, and we tell the truth about what doesn't work so other people can learn from it. We also have a couple of other things. I give an exclusive newsletter available only to members of the mastermind, where I share the latest tips, techniques and tricks and bigger strategies that I'm trying on my Amazon businesses, and tell you what works and frankly what doesn't work as well, so you can learn from my mistakes. And of course, there's an exclusive Facebook group to share all this good stuff with each other in between the meetings and the accountability calls. So there's a ton on offer here. It's obviously going to be very limited because it's maximum 15 people anyway, but for the first 5 people who come on board, there will be a special deal and a very special price for life. But that's obviously only for the first 5 people who come on board. So if you want to check it out, just go to amazingfba.com/London Mastermind, and you can find out there more about it. You can apply there as well if you want to, and if you move fast, you might even be one of the lucky first 5 people to take advantage of it as well. So that's amazingfba.com/London Mastermind. I'm going to put this video out to everyone on my podcast and everyone in the Facebook group, of which we've got nearly 900 members now, and on the YouTube channel. So I imagine that this will fill quite quickly. So if you're serious about it, get yourself over to amazingfba.com/London Mastermind, and you can find. Thanks for listening.